Good morning. Today I'm going to introduce sampling statistics, page 251, 252 in the textbook. I've tried to beat this home with limited success, so I'm going to try one more time a little earlier in the quarter. So I'm going to beat it up 4 times instead of just twice this quarter. So page 251, 252 in your textbook. Now, read the textbook, but one important thing I've added. I'm made up. I'm going to pretend that the inventory has 900 items in it, and we're going to take a sample of 100. So that's nowhere in the book. That's not in the teacher's manual. Ted just made it up. We're going to pretend that there's 900 items in inventory, and we're going to take a sample of 100 of them. Now, here's what the auditing standard says. Considering the results of audit procedures helps the auditor assess the risk of the actual misstatement in the population exceeds tolerable misstatement. Such risk may be reduced if additional audit evidence is obtained. Okay. The important part. In the case of test of details, the projected misstatement is the auditor's best estimate of the misstatement in the population. We'll have to figure out what the projected misstatement is. As the projected misstatement approaches tolerable misstatement, the more likely that the actual misstatement in the population exceeds tolerable misstatement. The projected misstatement is the odd from our sample. So we're going to take a sample and we're going to project the misstatement we find. And the projected misstatement is the best estimate of the misstatement in the population. As the projected misstatement approaches tolerable misstatement, as the projected misstatement gets closer and closer to tolerable misstatement, the more likely the actual misstatement in the population exceeds tolerable misstatement. Now the question is, when is approaching too close too close? How do we know when it's too close to tolerable misstatement? Page 251, they tell us that the allowance for sampling risk, whatever that is $15,750. That is too close. In the book's example, if the projected error is within $15,750 of tolerable error, it's too close to tolerable error. Notice $15,750 is the allowance for sampling risk. The tolerable error is $36,000. Keep those two separate. Okay. Now we're going to look at a bunch of different ways. So first, the book tells us that we've got a book value in inventory of $450,000. They tell us tolerable statement is $36,000, and they tell us the allowance for sampling risk is $15,750. So notice that I subtract the 36, the tolerable misstatement, from the book value, and I get $414,000. We want to be sure, we want to be very confident that the actual value of inventory exceeds $414,000. Then they're going to add on this allowance for sampling risk. We audited 100 out of 900, 1/9 of the population. So my sample, I can just multiply everything by 1/9. The book value of my sample should be $50,000, and it is according to the book. My tolerable misstatement, I can just divide by 9 and get 4,000. My sample, I need evidence that the value is greater than 46,000. Oh, plus I'm going to add that allowance for sampling risk. everything's same. I just divided it by 9, right, for my sample. Now, one thing that is different, the book tells me that, oh, in my sample, my audited value of my sample isn't 50,000, it's 46,500. So in my sample, I have an error of $3,500. My sample result was $3,500 less than I believe it should have been. I project the error. Oh, I just multiply by 9. Okay, so 3,500. My projected error is 31,500. Now, my tolerable misstatement is 36,000. To my way of thinking, that only leaves me an allowance for sampling risk of 4,500. The partner said he wanted at least 15,750. So I'm not comfortable. Right? I can't say that inventory is not materially overstated, at least not with as much confidence as the partner would like. Now, another way of looking at this, if I took my book value of 450 minus the 36,000, that would give 414. Okay. And my allowance for sampling risk would say my projected value for my sample should be greater than 429,750. It's not. My projected value for my sample is 418,500, which is less than. Now, the way the book does it is the book says, oh, I've got to take my book value, 450, minus my tolerable misstatement, which gives me 414, plus an allowance, and get 429. That's a little different than the way I see it, but it comes out the same because my sample result would indicate that I have a book value of 418,000. If I take the 450,000 book value and subtract my projected error, I get an estimate of 418,000. I can get the same thing just by taking my 46.5 sample result and multiplying it by what? By 9. And I believe if I take 46,500 and multiply it by 9, lo and behold, I get 418.5. So I'm not happy. I need more evidence. The projected error is too close to the tolerable misstatement. That's another way to say the projected balance is too far below the book value. Hopefully you understand those are the same thing. Okay, we're going to look at this table again. Now, the first two columns under this number 1 are the same as they were. But when we use statistics, we take averages. So I'm going to take the average, and the book value, if I take 450,000 and divide it by 900, I get 500. My sample should have an average of 500. It doesn't. It has a sample of 465. Okay, so my tolerable misstatement, if I take 500 minus 40, I get 460. Okay, I'm trying my sample. The best estimate of my sample results should indicate that the true value of the inventory exceeds 460. Well, my sample is 465, so I got to be careful here. My best estimate is greater than 460, but that doesn't provide enough confidence. The partner wants me to add an allowance for sampling risk. And I can just take that because my allowance for sampling risk, I could take 15,750 and divide it by 900, or I can take 1,750 and divide it by 100. So the partner says, I'm not going to be happy. I'm not going to have enough confidence in those results unless my sample mean exceeds 477.50. Okay. So one of the things I'm trying to get across here, so we've got a critical value. And that critical value is the book value minus the tolerable misstatement. So in the top line there, it's 450,000 minus 36, plus an allowance for sampling risk. Okay. We know from our statistics class that when I take a sample, I may get the wrong result. So I have to add an allowance for sampling risk. Now my sample is just 1/9, right? So that'd be 50,000 minus 36, minus 4, take 36,000 tolerable misstatement divided by 9, plus my allowance for sampling risk. Now, since I'm doing sampling, I'm going to take averages, and that would be 500, 460, 477. So I want you to reflect and make sure you understand these are all the same. I can talk about the book value. I can talk about the book value of our sample. I can talk about the average values. Okay, so make sure that you don't get confused when you bounce back and forth. The important thing is we talk about tolerable misstatement, but the fact that our sample results exceed tolerable misstatement is not good enough. We need an allowance for sampling risk. So down here at the very top line again, my book value is 450,000, tolerable misstatement's 414, but if the evidence shows that my best estimate is that the true value is 416,000, that's not good enough because I have to add an allowance for sampling risk. Okay. Let's think. So when I was a TA in the MBA program 137 years ago, I like to draw normal distributions. I like to think I'm pretty good at it. So I spent, you don't wonder how much time figuring out how to program this into the computer. If the population had a value of 414, okay, where did I get that? 450 minus 36,000, okay, or the average, if I divide that by 900, I get 460. That's why I've got 460 on the bottom. That's just so. If a population had a value of 414,000, if it had 900 elements, then the average for that population would be 460. Okay, now notice, if that's the case, we would expect half our sample means to be greater than 460. We would expect some of our sample means to be 461, 462, some 458, 440. Okay, so we'd expect our sample means to be packed around 460, but half of them would exceed 460. So in our example on page 251, we got a sample mean of 465. Oh my gosh. Look at that. Does that prove that the true value of the population exceeds 460? Not very persuasive, because if the population had a value of 460, an average value of 460, we would expect, a reasonably high possibility that we could get a sample mean of 460. So that doesn't provide us enough confidence. There's too much risk that a sample mean of 465 could have in fact come from a population with an average value of 460. So here again, what we're looking at this, the book value is 450 minus 36,000. Notice that top line is the difference between the book value minus tolerable misstatement. So that difference is tolerable misstatement. And then we add an allowance. The book said we want you to add $15,750. The partner told us that. So we've got a critical value. Now we convert that to averages. We just divide everything by 900. Hopefully, if you can see, if let's start from the right and left, if X3, if the sample mean equal 495, is there some probability that the true value is 460? Oh yeah, but it'd be pretty hard to get a sample mean of 495 if the true value were 460. Again, if my best estimate X2 of 480, I'm still comfortable. Okay. As the sample mean, if the sample mean gets closer and closer and closer to the book value, to the book value minus tolerable misstatement, or I guess it's easier to say, as the sample mean gets further and further and further from the average book value, that's another way of saying that the projected misstatement gets larger and larger. And as the projected misstatement gets larger and larger, it gets closer and closer to tolerable misstatement. Okay. If it gets too close, then we're not comfortable. We're not happy. We're not confident enough in our results. In this case, they say if the sample mean is less than 477.50, that's too far below book value. That's too close to tolerable misstatement, and we do not have enough confidence in our results to say that inventory is not materially overstated. Same thing, just showing up a little different. So if my sample mean is 465, the difference is 35, projected error is 31,500. I add the allowance. Now this is the way the book does it. I add the allowance and I get projected error of allowance of 47,250. My tolerable misstatement's 36,000. I'm not happy. If the sample result was 480, that would be a difference of 20, 500 minus 480. I multiply that by 900 to project it. I get 18,000. The projected error plus the allowance is 33,750. That's less than tolerable misstatement. I'm happy. My projected error plus my allowance needs to be less than tolerable misstatement. Okay. And then finally, if my sample mean were 495, the difference is 5. The sample error is 5. Multiply it by 900. My projected error be 4,500. My allowance, I add that to my allowance, and it's much less than tolerable misstatement. So I am, in fact, confident. I hope this helps you get a handle on it. Again, we'll beat this up throughout the quarter. I think it's a concept that's important. It's not enough for my sample mean. So in X1 here, 465, my projected error is less than tolerable misstatement. Okay, but I'm still not comfortable.